solutions align with existing government policies to effectively support green finance initiatives. So I think we can start this way as we move the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's not, government policy is sometimes a little bit behind the startups. So unfortunately, when it comes to alignment policy with actual execution on the ground, the green tech and fintech startups will always be one step ahead. However, when it comes to the narratives and pushing the boundaries around what can be done, there's a lot of, we'll get into incentives and those stuff just now, but you know, there are, in our world, startup acts that we are advocating for, and that's been years. So I think when it comes to top-down policy versus bottom-up push, I think there's a lot more that we can do from startups to align and basically create a coherent voice. Quite often when we deal with government from a policy perspective, they hear different solutions from different angles, you know. So, and when you finally get a seat at the table of speaking to the right people around the room, they would say, look, but just tell us exactly what would make a difference, you know. In this case, it's to do with finance, and I would really like to hear from the other end of the table on some of those solutions that can be advanced through more enabling policies. And it really is around incentives and research and development and areas where there's market, where governments can step in. Okay, I'm done.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. So I think with the Blue Space Financial Cloud, we recently had a partnership with Sustainable UK by using their, as a consulting company, they integrate their ESG metrics into our financial innovations. So in terms of policy, I would see how I'd like to explain it is like, you know, we're on one side of the bridge, right? We understand the policies and the regulation that can go into some of the fintech companies and how they want to innovate. So basically, if we're all collaborating on this platform, making sure that they have the rights, they understand the compliance, they understand the regulatory side of things, I think that way it would help some of the startups and some of the products that we're building, you know, be very compliant when it comes to policy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Jessica?
I think this is my observation from climate tech startups that are at very early stages, right? Policy is like one of the main key factors that actually like impedes their growth. So what would be good is actually having like the initial stakeholders as part of like the startup ecosystem, like having conversations early enough. So when climate tech startups like Octavia Carbon, for example, and others that are actually planning to do like infrastructure reach projects are actually able to accelerate faster in terms of scale, in terms of where they want to be in like 6 to 12 months without like hindrance from policy, from a safety perspective, from an environmental perspective. So I feel like the conversations with government and the conversations like with startups from private sector they should be engaging. So startups are aware of what is happening, and government stakeholders from policy making perspective are like going hand in hand with each other. We see a lot of like policy making happening at the top, right? But it doesn't funnel right down to the actual stakeholders. These are the startups and the entrepreneurs who are implementing these solutions, like in climate tech, getting the relevant financing. So what I would like to see as a player in this space is more collaboration within those different stakeholders, you know, resources or white papers that can be shared openly, and conversations with entrepreneurs and government stakeholders to accelerate the growth of these companies.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that as well. I think from the startup perspective, there's been a lot more involvement of startup when it comes to policy making. One example, Winnipeg, there was a policy around supporting coffee farmers within Kenya. There was a working group that we were also involved as well on how can we make sure these coffee farmers are getting paid on time. And there were stakeholders from researcher to government officials and a fair amount of startups as well. Like Jessica was saying, these collaboration between different stakeholders from different perspectives becomes very important to actually build a policy that makes sense to all stakeholders.
Thank you so much. At least we know we need, fintechs to be more engaging with the regulators so that at least the solutions that come in this space can be, of course, benefiting. So as we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about fintech innovations, how they can help manage incentives for both investors and companies, for anyone who's engaging in the green finance. What role can technology play in that ecosystem?
Yeah, I think from a startup on the panel or someone who's really involved in the deep things, I'd like to hear more from that side. But, finance is finance. It's as old as the hills. So the fact that one is going down a vertical which says, green finance, it's still, there's a buyer, there's a seller, there's payment terms in between, and there's a lot of information sharing that can facilitate that. So I think it boils down to access to information, access to, let's call it credit scoring-esque, and how to price that type of finance, and innovations around bridging it. Talking about how does the money move quicker from buyer to seller, and then how does one finance that cycle? Often when it comes to startups, we find it's sometimes a bit difficult to find, from a VC perspective, to find the optimal size projects, because often in green projects, it's massive infrastructure projects, so, and then at the startup phase, it's usually, or sometimes, more gadgets, so there's that sweet spot in between, is how do you find a scalable green, small enough but big enough, and exitable startup to invest in from an equity perspective, but equity is not the only finance option for the green economy. So, yeah.
Okay, so I think what I would like to add to that is, say for example, as an investor, you see two businesses. One is like the traditional business, and then the other is, is on the green finance side. It's quite easy to pick one. It's straightforward to pick one and say, okay, this is the one I want to go for. But I think with the incentives, it gives a much more attractive way for some of the investors to, want to involve the startups too as well when it comes to the incentives they will get for some of their products. So if there are certain rewards to it, and that way they are also able to see the benefits of it, I think it's an added advantage for some of the startups. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Let me go from the investment perspective. So when it comes to green finance, I think what we need to see in this space for climate tech and green finance is more of like patient capital, right? Like investment from a patient capital side is important. And to my colleague Keith's point is there's other alternatives apart from equity. So a lot of these companies that are in green finance actually need what we call working capital, right? So a lot of fintechs that are actually in this space and this ecosystem have actually come up with very innovative ways to actually provide a credit-based lending or embedded financing or working capital to these startups that are in green tech. And by default, for example, I think M-Copper is a really good example of a company that is playing in the green tech space and fintech space, right? They empower the local, not entrepreneur, but the locals living in Kenya to actually have a decent credit score as well, while providing them with power. So there's two sides of the investment space. There's the consumer end for finance in the green finance space, but there's also investment for the startups and the startup stakeholders. So there's the working capital, there's the credit-based scoring, but I would actually challenge investors and VCs in this space is like, how would you provide interesting financing and investment tools for the green finance ecosystem as patient capital?
Yeah, thank you. Speaking from more of the agri-fintech perspective, I think the fintech's role really comes to increasing visibility and transparency between the beneficiary and a financier that is looking to support that sector. We work a lot with different financiers, from commercial banks to government funds, who their intention is really to empower the sector to provide green finance to that sector. But sometimes they lack visibility. There's a massive information gap. So as a fintech, we're looking to close that gap to make sure that these opportunity actually trickles down to the beneficiaries ultimately.
Thank you so much. And you did very well to bring up, the information gap that you're currently seeing. And it seems that, the information about the incentives or tools that are available out here only sit, with just a couple of people. So given that, how can we bridge that gap? Do we need more tools, to bring in a lot of information, either from both the investors, the government, and the startups that are in this space? And what can we do better? And what is available out there that can the startups actually take advantage of?
Yeah, I think data and information makes for better decision making. So we, not a green tech investment at all, so I'm not pretending this is a green tech investment, but we recently invested in the entrepreneur would hate me saying that, but let's call it a space camera business. So basically, very, very advanced space cameras going up on satellites, and it's basically Earth observation equipment. So hardware and software investment, but the software that comes back is basically, most of it is to do with looking at agri, looking at observation, looking at Earth, melting of ice caps, looking at, it analyzes all of those things, and really it makes a difference to, if farm yields need to be embedded into other products to predict what is going to come out. This all is part of a much broader value chain, all the way from satellites to cameras to data to fintech. And I think when it comes, this was a realization on how rich data can actually help making better decisions in terms of farm crop yield based on some random software from a satellite all the way down. So I think from that perspective, it's not just about the data of a micro entrepreneur or of one field. It's really big data around the Earth, and how do certain climate changes affect a country's yield, and that stuff, obviously input prices, exports, and it needs to be taken into consideration across the value chain versus the micro data that one gets from someone's individual credit scoring, as an example.
Okay, so with bridging the information gap, with what we most times see when we have this collaboration, especially on the government side, they understand the risks and the policies. The investor obviously understands the risks and everything, and then the startup, they understand their operations. So it's always a bit difficult when it comes to communicate, because everyone is speaking like different languages. So one of the things that we're working on is to sort of create a platform where, it's like explaining different languages into one, where everyone has a full understanding of it. And that way it would help to bridge that gap where there's miscommunication and there's full understanding among all the stakeholders.
Echoing on that, I think it's also about providing the platform where these two stakeholders, one seeking for green finance and one providing the green finance, could actually connect. On the field, when we go to cooperatives, they're constantly looking for different ways to upgrade the machinery to have it a lot more eco-friendly, sustainable, and also ultimately cost-efficient. And this is something that we see on the ground, and on the other side, when we talk to financiers, commercial banks, they have an existing product that could basically assist that. So as a platform, as a fintech, we're here to basically bridge that gap and also to connect these opportunities. Yeah.
So I'd like to give an example of how many have heard about Hello Tractor? Show of hands? Yeah, so I think Hello Tractor provides like asset-based financing for farmers. And the challenge I've actually seen with Hello Tractor is like the investors interested in investing in them are like their anchor partner, John Deere, right? That looks like a clear acquisition right there. But my concern when like a John Deere or another anchor partner comes into this ecosystem, how nuanced are they with the environment? So back to what my colleagues have said is like this historical and institutional memory of like what has happened in the past and how partnerships and investments have gone. I think in the fintech, green tech space, I go back to the original point I said, like the data sharing, the information sharing, I think in this space is still at a very high level, right? We discuss things at like COP27, but by the time those policies actually get to the actual entrepreneurs who are actually doing the actual work on the ground, they don't have time, they're busy building, right? So again, providing like channels for data, channels of collaboration would be really, really beneficial. So I find like companies like Hello Tractor grow very slowly and they're always in the mode of like constant fundraising. So how can we actually help them from a patient capital side, from a data perspective, finding them more options from an investment perspective, to like bridge those gaps as they get between like being an agri-tech and a fintech business?
Yeah, I think maybe just to add on is the definition of green tech business versus the definition of fintech business. You know, if you just take fintech for one, it has a different defined ecosystem of what it can and can't be. It's to do with licenses, cross-border, unfair lending practices, credit scoring, access to information, and who has access to that information. Whereas green tech is very broad. You know, it's anything from how climate affects technology to asset finance, which has actually got nothing to do with green tech. It just happens to be assets servicing farms and so forth. So, you know, I think when it comes to some funds that I've chatted to here that are very much, I know there are frameworks and what actually defines as green techs and not legally, but it is quite a broad ecosystem. You know, anything to do with energy efficiency that, you know, there's a few examples in our portfolio where, you know, when we explain the assets to people, they said, oh, but you should dress it up as a green business because then access to additional funders and so forth. And like, yeah, maybe green tech is not doing a good enough PR exercise, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you so much for those insights. And I think as we move on, we've seen, you know, cross-border fintechs just focusing on cross-border remittances just between different either African countries or continents and things like that. So as they do that, how can they also facilitate, you know, information to get to different people in different sectors or in different countries? And how can they also ensure there's consistency in policies between the different countries that they're doing the cross-border payments in? Are fintechs expected to play a role in that particular sector? I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think particularly, thank you. From my experience, I'm originally from Japan, there's a lot of interest from Japan to invest in this market, from LP investors to actual funds to even government. But then again, it leads back to this information gap. Sometimes they will stick with one article that came up 5 years ago that is building this narrative that continues to build this more or less negative narrative. But we need to be able to make sure that these informations are trickling down and being spread and being shared globally when it comes to involving cross-border financing opportunity. I think that's one thing that I can speak from my experience.
Yeah, I think specifically in the green economy, there's definitely a lot more information that can be shared about just let's say input costs and things that have worked in other countries. You know, we have a continent full of sunshine. We have new developments from universities, specifically in you know, just talking from South Africa perspective. Stellenbosch University's got amazing technologies, everything from wave technology for energy to sun to satellite, and I don't think those things get shared. I mean, it's not so much a cross-border remittance challenge. It's more about intellectual property sharing of how some of these solutions have been solved. And how does one actually take that and build on top of it to basically, I mean, most of the countries in Africa have similar challenges around access to many things, and I think there should be more information sharing rather than just taking a cross-border solution in the traditional sense.
Just to add on that, so I think for cross-border collaboration, right, I don't think it should be limited. So if there's a company, let's say, for example, it's in Ghana and there are investors like in another country, and then, you know, another country is also working on, let's say the US, they're also working like on the tool. I think there's a way that, you know, all three parties can come together, just making sure that we're like, the three stakeholders are very cautious of the policies in those countries, so there can be collaboration. I don't think it can be limited. It's something that we can, you know, go across all the sectors. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
I think. Hello. Hello. Okay, there we go. Yeah. For me, I think how cross-border works, I've seen this BAS works with partnerships. So like working with infrastructure partnerships, for example, I see Henry and team here. AWS is a great platform if you actually like building solutions in the cloud to actually partner for like data. So like having those kind of partnerships and like from an infrastructure perspective, like to strengthen the backbone, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel again. Any like cross-border like payment integration, we have the likes of like Flutterwave, like using the infrastructure that has already been built, I think is super important. What I've seen in this ecosystem is like sometimes a startup will actually build an integration to actually serve their customer better. And this has happened like in the fintech space. I think a startup called Nala has actually built like an API called Rafiki because they were having challenges like with payment times, transaction costs. So it came from necessity. But I think if you don't if those are not your immediate customers and your revenue channels, then use existing partnerships from infrastructure perspective, policy perspective.
Okay, thank you so much. And now, as we see, you know, there are a lot of AI tools coming up that, you know, everyone is like building a fintech solution. What does the future look like? What do you expect to see? Are you going to see more AIs coming to solve this particular problem?
Thanks. I think it hooks onto your earlier question around data and how a little bit of data can be extrapolated. I think when it comes to, if you think about it, fintech is at the heart of it. Money is a made-up human construct, you know. So it is just a measure for exchange. So I think in the fintech space, I think it lends itself to a lot more kind of pure knowledge economy stuff that happens to facilitate real world things, you know, just to exchange. Whereas I think when it comes to green tech, I think a lot of that is more rooted in things you can touch and feel and build, and so I think it's a different animal altogether, where again the fintechs will facilitate all of that. I think that's more or less what this talk is all about. But I think when it comes to how will AI affect it, I think it'll basically just affect it with predictive analytics, with taking a lot of data points which are involved in, you know, moisture. And I mean, one of our startups is again not a green tech startup, but it works with automotive companies, and just basically take inputs which the human cannot. There are too many inputs. If you put into a production facility the same recipe of alloys and metals and heat and all the rest of it, weirdly, it doesn't produce the same output all the time because of subtle changes in the machine's vibration or subtle changes in the air, moisture, and all the rest of it. And these things need to automatically adjust. So I think it's more taking massive data inputs, which has almost got nothing to do with the actual production or the solution, but it's just too many inputs for humans to be able to quickly adjust a lever here and there and everywhere. So I think it's to do with everything, to be able to harness that power of data to be able to affect real world outputs, which is very different to what fintechs kind of do. It's basically taking something which is not real and facilitating that in a real sense, where yeah, so it's a different animal, but that's my prediction.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer for some of the tools that we discussed here, and you know, the different categories. Like AI would definitely go a long way in helping in terms of reporting and, you know, data analytics and all. So yeah, I think it's a no-brainer for that.
I'm a big fan of AI, yet I'm a skeptic at the same time. But I think what AI will help when it comes to the investment perspective is that it will actually automate in terms of decision making for the due diligence for this type of investments. I think if you actually have the right frameworks and implement the AI in the right way, it will accelerate due diligence for these startups in deployment of green finance. The other thing is, what I see is, I think fintechs have the largest amount of data across the globe ever. So I think like they actually will build case studies, in my opinion. I think they will actually come out with case studies for green financing. Big hypothesis, but might become true.
Yeah, I also see AI as just one of the tools that would make it easier for us to understand the data, but also to begin with, we need to there's still a long way, especially in the agricultural sector, to capture those data. And this is also why we're focused on digitizing and helping these cooperatives collect the data so that they can make better decisions. So in that sense, I think both data collection and AI goes hand in hand. And ultimately also it just helps to break down these data to something that could be more, that could lead to tangible actions, even all the way down to the smallholder farmers. So I think it's a tool that we should definitely embrace and continue using, but also at the same time, we need to still have to focus on data collection and all the digitization and all the other aspects to really maximize this new technology.
So yeah, thank you so much. And of course, we cannot underestimate, you know, the role that AI is going to play now and also still in the future. So now I think at this point, we'd like to take some questions from the crowd. In case you have any questions, just raise your hand and then you can bring it on. But also, as we wait for someone to ask a question in the crowd, is how can also, you know, startups align themselves, you know, to access these tools? Do they need just to do more work, research more? Because sometimes I think as we talk about, lack of information or information is not getting to the right people, I think also maybe the startups are just busy building and not even just looking for how they can align themselves. So what's that one word that you can tell, every startup that is actually building out here?
Yeah, as with most startups, I think the initial traction is the difficult part. I mean, aligning with some partnerships on the green finance or the green tech, or whether it's to do with warehousing solutions or whatever it is, to really get those first POCs going, to be able to predict where the business could go to get the seed financing. I think, as I said earlier, sometimes struggle a little bit with a cute product that is a gadget, for lack of a better word, versus a full-blown company that can actually grow with a C-suite team and exit to whoever. So there's a lot